Am I the problem, or is our couples therapy missing something? Hello. I want to start by thanking you for taking the time to read this. I know this will be long, but I truly appreciate any thoughts you might have. For those pressed for time, I've summarized the key points at the end, though context is essential to truly understand where I'm coming from. What I'm seeking is insight, a perspective, really, on the dynamic between me and my partner, particularly as we navigate our relationship in the context of couples therapy. It's a journey that I had hoped would bring us closer together, but, to my dismay, our most recent session has plunged us into an even deeper sense of crisis. Before taking any significant steps, I need to process what's happening and hear from others who may have experienced similar struggles. Your perspective could be invaluable. Let me start with the basics. I am a 30-year-old woman, and my partner is 28. We've been together for a year and a half, and we've been living together for several months now. Like many modern couples, we each bring our own histories, needs, and expectations into the relationship. Mine, in particular, has been shaped by a turbulent past. Over the last 4 years, I've been deeply engaged in therapy, peeling back the layers of childhood trauma and learning to understand and manage my anxious attachment style. This has been a long, often painful process, but it's also been a source of strength and self-awareness. My partner, on the other hand, has not yet delved into the world of therapy. He works tirelessly, holding down 2 demanding full-time jobs, and approaches life with a grounded demeanor that our counselor attributes to his secure attachment. This, in itself, feels like a point of divergence between us. He navigates life with a calmness and confidence that I often envy, while I find myself grappling with the echoes of my past. So far, we've attended 6 sessions of couples therapy together, and though I initially felt hopeful, I now find myself questioning the direction we're headed. The crux of our struggle lies in an imbalance that has grown increasingly evident as we've tried to merge our lives. I'm an immigrant, and while I've built a modest network of friends here, my social circle pales in comparison to his. My partner has a vast, tightly knit group of friends whom he affectionately refers to as his family. They share an incredible bond, cultivated over years, and their presence in his life is constant and unwavering. Nearly every weekend is reserved for them, and during the week, he often spends 2 or 3 evenings in their company. Holidays and vacations, almost always planned with this group. At first, I admired his dedication to his friends. There was something heartwarming about the way they rallied around one another, creating a chosen family that supported and celebrated each other. But as time went on, I began to feel like an outsider, not just in his social circle, but sometimes in my own relationship. From my perspective, the demands of his social life seemed to take precedence over our time together. Their plans often dictate our schedule, leaving little room for the intimacy and connection that I believe are crucial, especially in the early stages of a relationship. This dynamic has only grown more challenging since we moved in together. For me, sharing a home symbolizes a deepening of our bond, a commitment to building a life together. But instead of feeling closer, I've often felt like I'm competing for his time, his attention, and his emotional presence. I yearn for more one-on-one time with him, a chance to strengthen the foundation of our relationship before so much of our energy is poured into social gatherings. But expressing this need has been fraught, as it seems to pull us into the classic anxious avoidant dance. The more I crave connection, the more he retreats into passivity, leaving me to carry the weight of planning and nurturing our relationship. I've tried to be understanding. I recognize how much his friends mean to him and how important they are to his sense of identity and support. But there's a part of me that wonders, where do I fit in this picture? How do we strike a balance that honors his need for social time while also creating space for the intimacy and partnership that I crave? These questions have haunted me, fueling my anxiety and casting a shadow over the joy we once shared. We've faced countless situations where I've felt overshadowed by his deep commitment to his friends. It's not just the frequency of their gatherings, but the way their plans seem to dominate our shared calendar. From my perspective, Their social events often take precedence, dictating our time together and leaving little room for the one-on-one moments I deeply crave. And it's not that I begrudge their presence in his life, far from it. I admire their closeness and understand how rare and precious such bonds can be. But for a relationship as new as ours, where so much of our foundation is still being built, I sometimes wonder if we're prioritizing the wrong things at the wrong time. His friends aren't just a group of casual acquaintances, they're couples who have been together for more than 10 years, sharing inside jokes, traditions, and a rhythm that comes from such long-standing intimacy. When I'm with them, it often feels like stepping into a dance that I don't know the steps to. They're kind to me, welcoming even, but there's an unshakable sense of being on the outside looking in, a feeling that I suspect is amplified by the fact that I'm not from here. My own family and friends are far away, and I've yet to build the kind of support network that could provide a similar sense of belonging. Perhaps that's part of why I yearn for more time with my partner, time to nurture our connection before it's diluted by the expectations of others. This longing has only intensified since we moved in together. Sharing a home felt like a pivotal step in our journey, a declaration that we were ready to blend our lives in a deeper, more intentional way. But instead of fostering closeness, the move seems to have magnified the gaps between us. I often find myself assuming the role of the planner and caretaker, orchestrating date nights, booking events, cooking meals, and pouring my energy into creating meaningful experiences for us. I was especially excited to take the reins for our first Christmas together, envisioning a warm and festive celebration that would mark the start of new traditions. But as the weeks passed and my efforts were met with what felt like indifference, I began to feel like I was carrying the weight of the relationship on my own. These dynamics have fueled my anxiety in ways that are hard to articulate. It's not just the frustration of unmet expectations, it's the deeper fear that I'm not enough, that my needs are too burdensome, and that I'm destined to be sidelined by the people and things that matter more to him. The more anxious I feel, the more passive he becomes, retreating into his work or his social commitments while I scramble to bridge the widening gap between us. It's a cycle that feels all too familiar, one that I recognize from the anxious avoidant dance I've studied in therapy. But knowing the pattern and breaking free from it are two very different things. In October, I suggested we try couples therapy. I thought it might be a way to level the playing field, to create a space where both of our perspectives could be heard and validated. I was hopeful, even optimistic, that with the guidance of a neutral third party, we could find a balance that worked for both of us. And at first, it seemed like we were making progress. The therapist zeroed in on my anxious attachment, helping me explore the ways my past experiences might be shaping my responses in the present. She encouraged us to commit to one weekend day and one date night per week, a small but meaningful step toward carving out dedicated time for each other. For a fleeting moment, it worked. That first week, we honored the commitment, and I felt a sense of relief and hope. But as quickly as it began, the routine unraveled. Week after week, our plans were rescheduled, often at the last minute, to accommodate his friends or work obligations. Some of the reasons were valid unexpected deadlines or urgent requests from colleagues. But others felt less so, like casual dinners or impromptu gatherings that could have been skipped without consequence. Each time it happened, it reinforced the sense that our relationship was being squeezed into the margins of his life, a priority only when everything else had been accounted for. The therapist, meanwhile, seemed understanding of these changes, often emphasizing the need for me to manage my anxiety and adjust my expectations. I understood the importance of this work. It's something I've been deeply committed to in my individual therapy. But as the sessions progressed, I began to feel like the focus was disproportionately on me, as though the burden of change rested solely on my shoulders. My partner's social commitments were framed as a legitimate need, while my longing for more quality time was seen as something to be tempered or scaled back. It was as if the narrative had been set. He was the secure partner with a high need for social interaction, and I was the anxious one who needed to adapt. Each session left me grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, I wanted to take responsibility for my own growth and not let my anxiety dictate our dynamic. On the other, I couldn't shake the feeling that my needs were being minimized, that the core issue, the imbalance in our priorities, was being glossed over in favor of focusing on my responses. It's an exhausting place to be, caught between wanting to be the best version of myself for this relationship and wondering if my efforts are masking deeper incompatibilities. Our therapist has consistently shown understanding toward my partner's need to reschedule our plans, often framing it in the context of his demanding workload and his secure attachment style. She's quick to validate his perspective, emphasizing his high need for social time as a natural expression of his personality. I do appreciate her efforts to see his side of things. It's important to me, too, that his needs are acknowledged and respected. But the outcome of these discussions often leaves me feeling like I'm the one who must shoulder the burden of change. The message, intentional or not, seems to be that my anxiety is the central problem, and that if I could just learn to control it better, everything would fall into place. Each session becomes a quiet battlefield in my mind. I try to listen objectively, to absorb the therapist's advice without letting defensiveness cloud my judgment. But it's hard to sit there and hear that I need to give my partner more space when that space already feels infinite, stretching wide enough to encompass his friends, his work, and his hobbies, while leaving little room for us. I don't want to be the needy partner. I don't want to be the one who's always asking for more. But when the therapist shifts the focus back to what I need to change, I can't help but feel like I'm being asked to disappear, to shrink my needs and my desires until they no longer pose a challenge to his preferences. This week, I decided to step outside the framework of our sessions and propose something different. I suggested that we spend New Year's with my family. It felt like a fair compromise, a way to bring balance to the holiday season that was otherwise dominated by his social commitments. I gave 2 weeks' notice, thinking that would be enough time to plan, but his response caught me off guard. He told me that it was too short of a notice, that he'd rather stay home. When I brought this up in therapy, our counselor agreed that his reasoning was valid, and I chose to respect that, even though it stung. I didn't want to create unnecessary tension, especially during a time that's supposed to be about joy and togetherness. But then, just days later, he received yet another invitation to spend time with his friends during the stretch between Christmas and New Year's. It was the 4th invitation in as many days, and I could see how effortlessly he folded it into his already packed schedule. Watching him fill every spare moment of his time off, time I had hoped might finally be ours, was like watching sand slip through my fingers. The more I tried to hold on to the idea of a meaningful Christmas together, the faster it seemed to vanish. I felt the familiar pang of anxiety rise in my chest, a mix of hurt and frustration that I couldn't suppress. It wasn't just about the plans themselves, it was about what they symbolized. After working 2 grueling full-time jobs, this was his first real break in months. And yet, instead of using that time to rest, reconnect, and nurture the relationship we'd both claimed to value, he was devoting it entirely to the same group of people who already occupied so much of his life. I couldn't understand it. Was I asking for too much? Was it unreasonable to want our first Christmas together to be about us? When I brought up my feelings in our next therapy session, I hoped for a moment of clarity, a shift in the narrative that would validate the longing I'd been carrying. But instead, the therapist suggested something that left me reeling. She told us that we seemed to be stuck in a negative cycle and that perhaps the best solution was for me to leave for my home country, to pause the relationship and take some time apart. She proposed this just 4 days before Christmas, a time when most couples are coming together, not pulling away. I was stunned. I could barely process her words. Was this her way of saying that my needs were too much, that my presence in the relationship was the problem? The thought of leaving felt unbearable, not just because of the logistical challenges but because of the emotional weight of what it implied. I had poured so much of myself into building this relationship, into creating a sense of home and partnership. Walking away, even temporarily, felt like abandoning all of that effort, like admitting defeat. My partner, to my dismay, seemed open to the idea. He said he thought it might be what we needed, a way to reset and find clarity. But to me, It felt like a bandage on a wound that needed stitches. How would physical distance solve the emotional chasm between us? How would leaving address the underlying imbalance that had driven us to therapy in the first place? Instead of working together to bridge the gap, it felt like we were being encouraged to widen it, to retreat to our respective corners in hope that time apart would magically realign our priorities. I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal, not just from my partner but from the therapist I had trusted to guide us. Her suggestion felt like a dismissal of everything I'd been trying to communicate, as though the only solution to our struggles was for me to remove myself from the equation entirely. It wasn't about the logistics of traveling home on such short notice or the disruption it would cause to my carefully laid plans for the holidays. It was about what it represented, the idea that my presence, my voice, and my needs were obstacles rather than integral parts of our relationship. As I sat there, paralyzed by the weight of it all, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really the best path forward? Or was it just another way of sidestepping the deeper issues we hadn't yet addressed? More than anything, I wanted to believe that our relationship was worth fighting for, that with the right effort, we could find a way to balance his social life with our shared needs. But in that moment, all I felt was a growing sense of doubt, a gnawing fear that perhaps I was the only one still holding on. I sat with the therapist's suggestion like a stone in my chest, its weight unrelenting as I tried to process what it meant. Confusion swirled in my mind, mixing with devastation and a creeping sense of paralysis. I had envisioned this holiday season as a pivotal moment for us, a chance to step away from the noise of our daily lives and focus on building something meaningful together. Instead, it felt as though the very foundation of our relationship was being called into question, as if my presence had become a disruption rather than a source of stability. My partner, for his part, seemed ready to follow the therapist's advice without much hesitation. He saw it as an opportunity to gain perspective, a way to reset the relationship. But to me, it felt like a confirmation of my deepest fears, that I was the problem, that my longing for more time and connection was too much to ask for. While I had spent weeks preparing for our first Christmas together, imagining cozy evenings and shared traditions, he seemed indifferent to the plans I'd made. 2 weeks' notice to join my family had felt unreasonable to him, but me leaving on just 4 days' notice was somehow seen as a viable solution. I tried to remind myself of the reasons we had started therapy in the first place, to strengthen our bond, to navigate the challenges that inevitably arise in a relationship, and to find a balance that worked for both of us. I had hoped it would be a space where we could both feel heard, where compromises could be made, and where we could build the kind of partnership that could weather life's uncertainties. But instead, it seemed like the process was widening the divide between us, casting my needs as excessive while validating his every decision. The therapist's approach left me struggling to make sense of everything. I understood her intent to help us break free from the negative cycle that had taken root in our dynamic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her suggestions were one-sided. By continually validating my partner's behavior, she had given him little reason to reflect on the imbalance that was causing so much strain. Meanwhile, I was left questioning myself at every turn. Am I expecting too much? Should I be more accommodating? Is my overinvestment in the relationship making me clingy, or is it fair to want my partner to meet me halfway? I thought about the countless times I'd tried to support his social life, encouraging him to spend time with his friends and never once suggesting that he pull back from the relationships that clearly meant so much to him. I had always wanted to be the kind of partner who understood his needs, who valued his independence and individuality. But in doing so, I had pushed aside my own needs, convincing myself that they were less important. And now, faced with the prospect of spending the holidays apart, I couldn't ignore the emptiness that had taken root in my heart. I found myself wondering why my longing for more quality time together had become so difficult to navigate. Was it truly an unreasonable expectation, or was there something deeper at play? Was I clinging to an idealized version of our relationship, hoping for something he simply couldn't give? Or was he the one falling short, unable, or unwilling to create space for us amid the many demands on his time? The questions felt endless, and I knew there were no easy answers. Relationships, I had learned through therapy are complex and nuanced, requiring constant effort in communication. But effort, I realized, was something I couldn't shoulder alone. It wasn't enough for me to keep trying, to keep adapting, if my partner wasn't equally committed to finding solutions that worked for both of us. And yet, despite everything, I still cared deeply for him. I didn't want to lose what we had, even as I acknowledged that what we had wasn't sustainable in its current form. The thought of walking away, of leaving behind the life we'd started to build together, was almost too painful to bear. But staying without changes, without a clear path forward, felt equally untenable. In the end, I knew that something had to give. This limbo we were in, this constant push and pull, wasn't fair to either of us. I had to decide what I was willing to accept and where my boundaries lay, even if it meant risking the relationship I had fought so hard to preserve. I'm not sure what the future holds for us. Perhaps time apart will provide the clarity we need, or perhaps it will only confirm the cracks that have already begun to show. Either way, I know I can't keep pouring myself into a relationship that leaves me feeling unseen and unheard. I deserve a partner who values my presence as much as I value his, someone who is willing to meet me halfway and build a life that honors both of our needs. I'm sharing this story not because I have all the answers, but because I hope to hear from others who have faced similar challenges. Am I asking for too much? Or should my partner be making changes too? How do you navigate the balance between independence and intimacy, between supporting your partner's needs and honoring your own? I want to believe that love can be enough, that with effort and understanding, we can find a way to bridge the gap between us. But for now, all I can do is take it one day at a time, trusting that whatever happens, I'll find the strength to move forward, whether that's with him or on my own.